Okay, we are back on the Raimy and Bini podcast. It is great to be back. I'm coming to you from New York City this week. Raimy is here, and our guest this week is Kevin Schulman. Raimy will do the introductions in just a moment. Raimy, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Doing very well.
Okay, good. Let's get right to it because otherwise I'm going to start talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers and it's going to be bad. So we're going to just dive right into the conversation. By all means, take it away.
Sure, I am very excited about our guest today, as I have spent a lot of time reading his material, reading stuff that he's put out there, and I've had a lot of questions that have cropped up as I've read his blogs and LinkedIn posts. So I'm very excited to introduce Kevin Schulman. Kevin is an academically trained social scientist focused on answering the why behind human behavior. He is the founder of DonorVoice, behavioral science fundraising agency, and DVC Canvas, a canvassing and tele-fundraising firm. Kevin is the managing editor for the Agitator DonorVoice blog, which is a blog I think that I've been reading for, it's got to be over 10 years. I think I've been reading that stuff for a very long time. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I look forward to the conversation.
All right, awesome. I want to start us off sort of in the big picture. Can you tell us what it means to, what is behavioral science and how do you bring it into the nonprofit space?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I think behavioral science means lots of different things, and therefore kind of nothing all at once. It I expect it probably gets narrowed down more typically than not to these nudges, these kind of psychological biases that we have, and the the academic community, in my view, probably hasn't helped in that there's been this nuclear almost proliferation of biases. Everyone's who's an academic worth their salt's got to have their own bias that they've invented or come up with. And so there's a lot of redundancy as a result. A lot of these don't even actually hold up in the real world. So there's that problem as well. And, more importantly, from our perspective, even if none of that were true, it's a very narrow view on why people do what they do, these psychological biases. And so in our trade, our business, these nudges, as they're often referred, are maybe kind of 10% of our effort and focus. For us, behavioral science is more multidisciplinary, and it's focused on why people do what they do, the psychology of decision making, and yes, applied to charitable giving. And so it is kind of replacing, hopefully, also some of the intuition and folklore that permeate the sector with more evidence around why people think, decide, how people think and feel, and therefore decide and act. And our aim is to get, I guess if I could simplify it, stop asking, did this appeal work? And start asking, who did this work for and why? And so in that way, kind of shifting from persuasion to alignment. We're in the attraction business. Persuasion is a fool's errand. And I think a lot of fundraisers probably expect, if the way that they craft appeals is any indication, that we're more of a persuasion business. And I think that's fundamentally mismatched with how people tend to operate.
So just sitting on that point, so you're saying that at some level you're trying to eliminate a lot of the audience that you have to persuade to find the audience that naturally or somewhat naturally aligns with the work that you do, and then just that's who you're talking to. And then by extension, you're removing a lot of the guessing that I see, and I'm sure you see a lot of organizations are just they're sort of just shot in the dark, guessing who their audience is, and then wondering why it's not working.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, fish where the fish are. Kind of define who is your audience. And I think that that step is maybe implied, or kind of just the organization sort of institutionally infers it, but it's never really been articulated. And sometimes when it's articulated, it's really generic. Well, our audience is anyone who's over 45 years old and lives in the US, or is other sort of kind of vague demographic statements, rather than some more specific identity-based audience definition, meaning who are the types of people that, based on who they are, that would connect to our mission, not to our brand, but to our mission. That's your market. Um, and then write to those people.
Can you narrow that down? Can you give for instance?
Yes. So a lot of these become really obvious after the fact, and it I think it risks the charity sort of dismissing as well. That's obvious. Of course, that's the case. And yet, when I look at how they operate and behave, the obvious is not really being applied. So if I am an animal welfare organization, there are going to be people who are animal lovers, are my best constituency. And the path to growth is recognizing that's a starting point, not an end point. And so let's dig a layer deeper. If you're in the sort of animal welfare space and you're an animal shelter, as a for instance, well, you've got dog people and cat people, and often never the twain shall meet. If you're a conservation group, yes, there are people who are conservationists, but underneath that, there are people who, when they think about conservation, are more flora versus fauna. And so the starting point is going to be probably the most obvious one. If you're a disease charity, it's people who have a connection to that is disease. But there's gradations there. There's subgroups within, and I think that's the real path to growth, is starting to recognize that you've got some pretty obvious audience matching or identity matching to mission, types of people, but there are subgroups there, and that the the subgrouping is the strategic view of segmentation versus some of the tactical segmentation that gets done now. And then you're matching the message more precisely to the person, is the path to growth, because it's about alignment and attraction and demonstrating that we know who they are.
Yeah, you use the term on your site and in a couple of videos that I watched on personalized matching. And that what you just described is very much that, which admittedly on some level raises the amount of work necessary for an organization to do to a degree probably they don't, if they're not going to admit it out loud, I'll admit it out loud for them. They don't want to do that level of segmentation. But the term, I really like the term personalized matching because better than segmenting, which is, very technical term, personalized matching is and then you described in one of the case studies, I think, taking the same story, giving it 4 or 5 different angles. It's the same exact story, but it aligns specifically to subgroups of the audience. In the case of animal lovers, it could be right. Dogs versus cats versus specific kinds of dog owners versus the person who buys the dog versus the kids who love the dog or whatever it is. And then you've really gone, I mean, 5, 6, 7 layers deeper, and the more, I guess, the likelihood, obviously, is that the increased giving happens at that point.
Yeah, that's the bet, and we've made the bet enough to know that it tends to be a winner, and that the juice is worth the squeeze, as you know. And so, we're it, it's unavoidable, although we tend to avoid it a lot. Humans are messy and complicated, and our fundraising needs to kind of match that messy, complicated world. But that doesn't mean that it's forever inefficient or impossible. I mean, a lot of this, people are messy and complicated, but predictable, and you can put process in place and start to systematize these things, and still get operational efficiency, even if we're building a more complicated system to match the more complicated kind of human environment in which we're trying to operate. So identity is the first layer when we think about why people give. People are, um, forever and always giving to reinforce that sense of self. There is no giving that is sticky, that lasts, which is the only thing that matters in fundraising, or it's the only thing that should matter, that isn't autobiographical. Full stop. We've looked at the data over and over and over again, and the only people who are continue to give year after year are those who have some personal connection to the mission, which again sounds super obvious after the fact. And so that is forever and always that first point of connection. That is a necessary one. You can't manufacture commitment to a cause. If you don't have it, you don't have it. Now, in the personalized matching kind of space, and this is where, again, it's going to get a little bit more involved, but if you want to be optimum, kind of globally, maximally optimum, you have to start getting to this level of sophistication, in my view. And this ought to be table stakes, not, gee, we'll do it if we ever become big enough, or and that is the nested underneath identity is people's individual personalities. So that's our other layer of personalized matching. So um, the way to think about that is that you can have let's use our dog example, two people who are dog lovers, and it's super salient for them. If you asked how important it is to them that they're a dog lover, they would be equal in that way. Let's say demographically they're identical. They're next door neighbors. In fact, they look the same, and by all sort of third-party data measures or whatever else, they are the same. And all the CRM, they're identical. Their giving behavior looks the same. We know that if they have a different kind of temperament or personality, then those two neighbors warrant different appeals. And so even though their identities are the same, and we rely on, it's referred to as the big five. There's therefore five parts to our personality, and nobody's a zero on the five. They have a very useful or easy to remember kind of mnemonic device. It's an acronym, OCEAN, that represents the big five traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. This has been out there in the public domain as a byproduct of the personality researchers for 40, 50 years. It's super psychometrically sound. And why it matters is that one's personality dictates, at least in part, what I give attention to, what I tend to agree with, and what I act on. And so that appeal that, yes, for the dog person versus the cat person, I want to send dog to dog and cat to cat, and that is better than sending dog to both and muddying the waters. But not all dog people are the same. And so I can further increase the degree to which it feels like it was written for me, and reduce my cognitive effort, because I don't want to put very much into this, and have it feel very aligned and kind of smooth the mental glide path to giving if you tailor to trait. So the conscientious person, if we're talking about the dog lover, wants to hear about the effort that the animal shelter is putting in for the care and feeding of this animal. The person who's high in agreeableness, all they want to do is be told that we're making the environment for that dog warm and friendly and hospitable. Those people are motivated to provide care and prevent harm. The conscientious person is motivated by achievement and effort and progress, and they want to see some of that and feel some of that in the visuals or the copy. So, that is hopefully illustration of my point, that we need, if we're going to be globally optimal, we're going to have to realize that we need to get our fundraising dialed up a notch.
I like the term that you used to sort of introduce this, which is that these are table stakes, just to sit at the table. These are things we should be doing. To me, the way that you're describing this, and I heard the case study that you did, it was with Charity Water, I believe, correct?
Yeah, that's out there in the public domain. Yeah.
So it feels to me, just hearing you describe this, like a heavy lift for a smaller organization that doesn't have the resources to go and do this. But at the same time, I totally understand how fundamental it is to build a fundraising strategy for an organization. This is something that small and mid-sized organizations can implement.
Yes. Well, I know we're not looking for promos here, but it's worth noting that you can know the the personality of the people in your file for 15 cents a name. We don't need to get into all the details, but yes, that is a, a multiple year product development effort on our part, and we use third party data to reverse engineer. But for 15 cents a name, which means it's not a cost barrier for any organization, you can have the big five trait profile at the individual record level. And then the next question becomes, all right, well, how the heck do I create the agreeable version versus the conscientious one? And this is where this is a good use case for generative AI. And generative AI, as we all know, is, I don't care which model you're talking about, all those off the shelf kind of base LLM models. Guess what? They memorize the internet. Guess what's on the internet? An enormous amount of writing, scholarly writing on the big five. All those LLMs, they know the big five inside and out. And so getting a tailored version for conscientious versus agreeable with one of those LLMs is very doable.
So I want to step back for a second. I know that on some level what you do is new to the business because nobody else is sort of doing this. My question is sort of back as to why is nobody doing this? Why? And this is what you're saying. Everything you said so far seems incredibly obvious. Let's say on some level, right? At the same time, they go to your website or you listen to the video or read the case studies, and they're like, "Oh, I never thought of that," or "Oh, that's super new," and you realize, "No, it's not new. Just you didn't do it." Or so I'm. Is the field behind? Is the field slow? I don't want to say the field's lazy, but like what do you sense about the community of nonprofits and the fundraising world around this specific thing? Because I see it from the other side. I'm talking to the leaders and the fundraisers, and they're pulling their hair out, and they don't have a clue as to why did that person who donated for 20 years stop donating?
Yeah.
That person's an alumnus of our institution. They don't support us, and they really have no clue. And none of what you're talking about, at least in the world where we operate mostly, is being done in an obvious manner.
Yes. So we would argue it's a system failure, and we need an upgrade or we're in the DOS world. We need to get to some modern Windows version. And in the current system that I think is the default and where the vast majority of charities, big or small, operate, there are four kind of interlocking fail points that all reinforce each other. And imagine gears that are they're sort of working, but they're also making a lot of noise and they're starting to rust up. And so the first fail point, and these are sequential in my view, and I don't know that one could sort of write the history of fundraising practice and necessarily have it mapped to the perfect chronology, but I think there's a logic to the sequencing of this. The original sin in fundraising is believing that people give because we ask, and that the formula is that simple: ask more, make more. And there is some support for that if you live in a very superficial kind of descriptive reporting worlds, and you ran a test for a year on 2 appeals versus 4 or 4 versus 8, and you're measuring the the total gross rev and even the net, you will have some evidence that supports that ask more, make more. And then when you take that theology, that belief structure, and you have more channels, we just proliferate the amount of asking. That has always been way too simple of an answer. People give because we ask. People do not give because we ask. But there's that belief. And it the reality, just to pick that piece of it apart for a moment, is it ignores what is undefeated in the world of marketing, and that's diminishing returns. There are massive diminishing returns. So even if that holds for a bit, there's always some curve to that performance. The other part that's sort of known, if not necessarily operationalized. The part that's never talked about is the massive amount of dollar shifting, just cannibalization, whether that's kind of from appeal 2 to appeal 3 or just across channel. The thing you have to always ask yourself is this new thing, a new thing could be an extra appeal that we're slapping in or a new channel that we're going to add into the mix, are we creating new behavior or are we just shifting behavior around? And there's a ton of shifting behavior around, especially when you get into these mid and large size charities. And so those mid and large size charities where they're sending out 10, 20 appeals a year, 50, 100 different solicitations across various channels. And that's not abnormal, those numbers that I'm throwing out. They are demonstrating for the smaller charity what doesn't work. Don't follow that. But if you believe that people give because we ask, then the second fail point, which again, it has a logic if you're operating in that mode, is that sameness, kind of sending the same thing to everybody, it's an efficiency play. If it's really just about the asking, why would I bother with all of this tailoring, this personalized matching garbage, Kevin? It's a pain in the ass. It's just too much work. And so let's just send the same thing to everybody. And that inevitably, those things kind of create this sort of negative set of performance. And so the third thing that has happened, sort of with a chronology around it, is the gimmicks, the sort of externally motivated stuff, premiums, matching gift offers out the wazoo, faux membership, faux urgency. All of those things are externally motivating, which means that they might do something in the immediate, but they have no staying power. They're a negative to my psychology, even though I might in the moment respond. And so you juice the stats a bit by using all of these gimmicks. And then we lock all of this in place with this exceptionally myopic focus on bottom of the funnel metrics. Conversion rate, average gift, my return on ad spend, ROAS. So the way that we're assessing success or failure is limited to those metrics that are going to make this thing look like it might be working in the immediate. And so all of those things create system fail. And the model is just broken. And you can't go in and fix any of those things. You have to build a new system. We refer to it as a human operating system. So you have to set up an entirely separate operational model rather than trying to go in and tweak at the edges around the current system.
You like literally just blew up the entire industry like in 5 minutes. I mean, you know, those 4 pillars that you just described are literally everybody other than the people that probably work with you. So, I guess before any other questions, like where does an org start? Is they want to say, okay, you know what, this has worked in some form or fashion this way, but I definitely believe what Kevin is telling me here, and there's a better way for us forward over the long haul. Where do they start? What do they do?
Well, there's the starting point for a lot of businesses is getting some consumer understanding, kind of understanding your market. So in this case, what are the identities that we think are at play? And then asking yourself, where can I find these people? And putting a lot of effort and emphasis around your own organizational positioning and your brand, which we can talk about. And your goal with all marketing is trying to create mental availability. I need people to know that we exist. I need people to know what category we live in. So I'm in the animal conservation space, or I'm in the disease X space, or um, international relief for social justice, whatever it is. You have to create mental availability. There's a lot of things that are important to be able to increase the efficacy of that marketing outreach so that you can create that mental availability where I don't just know you, but I put you into this category and I think you're distinctive in this way. And that is job number one, is that branding job, which is a massive miss for the sector, big or small. There are very few organizations that are really focused on growing their brand in the way I described. Yes, you need to also have the kind of direct response performance marketing part of it. But if you don't have the get people to know who I am and what category I live in and have some distinctive elements to it, then you're forever dealing with a very, very, very small universe of people, which is the ones that do know you. And then you're just sort of stuck with, even among the ones who do know you, their inclination to act today, which the inclination is always not to act today, which is why you get so. And for any given appeal, even if you're perfectly targeted the audience who knows you and is willing to act, 95% of them aren't going to do it that day. And so, you have to recognize kind of those ratios, and that there's a big job to be done in creating that mental availability among the people who don't know you, but are in market for you based on kind of their alignment with the mission. So that's a nod in part to the requirement for brand building that I think every charity is missing a beat, or more than a beat, in that objective. And that's because fundraising gets stuck with these very myopic, what did you do for me today sort of measures. And I think charities, fundraisers, agencies that support fundraisers, we need to be in the growth business. There are way too many fundraising apparatus, whether it's internal or it's an external partner or some combo, where they're sort of satisfied somehow with shrinking donor count, rev. A lot of charities that are forever kind of they're everything is moving in the wrong direction, and that's because apparently no one's mandate in fundraising is growth. We got to step back and figure out why we aren't growing, and in part it's the sort of system fail that I mentioned.
It's funny, this conversation is doing exactly what reading your stuff online does, which is makes me deeply uncomfortable, and I love it, and I say that in a very loving way. So if we're I'm buying into this, how can an organization determine what the best frequency of ask is? Let's go back to that, because I think that's a really, really good example of something that the sector might be or is getting wrong. So, okay, there's diminishing returns by asking as many times as we are. So what is the right cadence?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like asking how long is the piece of string. So let me,
Sure.
as I've probably demonstrated in this session so far, give a complicated answer to a simple question. Here's a fundraising belief that is just wildly wrong. Yeah, and it's around recency, which, if you're familiar with RFM, there's a recency of the gift, and then the frequency of the gift, and then the M is the monetary value. And the vast majority of thinking and then operationalizing of RFM, and I don't care if it's a crude application of RFM, or if it's a full-blown statistical model, or if someone's going to say AI every other minute. Most of those when that gets done, you're using that, there is a built-in belief, and I think most fundraisers would not have, when I say this, that recency of giving is the best predictor of the next gift.
Right.
And that is wildly superficial and incomplete. But when you're using RFM, and again, it doesn't matter if it's a sophisticated model or just some superficial version of RFM in a spreadsheet, what you are doing is comparing Jill to Jack. And let's say that Jill, on average, if you looked over a couple years or whatever, she's a better donor than Jack. She tends to give more often. She tends to give higher dollar amount. She tends to, and all of the RFM selection, Jill is being compared to Jack. She's always going to look better than Jack on any given day with just a basic RFM kind of ranking exercise. So we over-select the heck out of Jill, and she's stuck making up for Jack's kind of crappy or suboptimum below average behavior. And while it's true for purposes of this example, Jill's on average a better donor than Jack. If Jill gave yesterday and Jack hasn't given in 9 months, Jack is a much better choice to put into the next appeal than Jill. The percentage of people who give in rapid succession is exceedingly small. And it's as if the entire apparatus is built to try to satisfy this incredibly small constituency who might give in kind of rapid succession. It just doesn't happen as a matter of course. And so if you're building out new donor journeys, and that is every charity's biggest problem, big or small, is the small percentage of people who go on not just to make a second gift, because that's merely another milestone, but who become sort of lifetime givers. Is that this is the small percentage who go on to do that, right? It's everyone's biggest problem is year one. Well, the two most likely outcomes in the current kind of operating system are never, ever give again. And that's about 60%, never, ever give again. And you have to, if you only narrow it to, I gave in 25, do I give in 26? It's around 70% who don't do that. If I extend the window out and I look at people who gave in 25, do they give in 26 or 27? It's around 60% who don't ever give again. So that's the definition I'm using. So that's the most likely outcome. With the current fundraising apparatus, ask more, make more. Recency is the best predictor. So the best time for ask for the second gift is right after the first one, so they can sort of identify themselves and give it that. So most likely is 60%, never give again. The next most likely outcome, and that one's obviously a negative outcome. The next most likely outcome is a positive outcome, and that is people only ever give once a year. We very uncreatively describe them as mode of one. If you look on any file, I don't care if they're soliciting 50 times, and I'm telling you, there are charities that solicit 50 times in the mail every freaking week, or soliciting 3 times a year, 4 times a year. The most common giving pattern, and sometimes it's a majority, but it's always a plurality, is this mode of one. Okay, so and that's when they're solicited every week versus 4 times. What that tells you is that it's sort of an innate preference. This is kind of their cyclical nature. They're going to give once a year. That's what they're locked into. It's probably what they do with every other charity. And so I want to have a new donor journey, as it were, that is built on the do no harm adage, and I want to play the odds like I'm in Vegas. Okay, I want to avoid the do no harm, which is the 60% who never give again, and I want to play the odds and be highly satisfied with them being highly satisfied with the most likely positive outcome, which is they only ever give once a year. And so, contrary to what I think is popular belief, I am not trying to get the second gift in the first 90 days, which is just a garbage myth that pervades the sector, that if you don't get the second gift in the first 90 days, you're toast. It's just garbage. It's just not right. And instead, in year one, right after they've given, I have jobs to do. My jobs to do are on the psychological side. I need to have them feel a sense of, oh yeah, mission alignment's critical. So if you've caught lightning in a bottle and they just gave because of some of these external motivators, forget about it. But assuming they've got some connection to the mission, then the job to be done in the first 6 months is to convey a sense of autonomy and choicefulness, and that starts with the initial appeal. It includes the however we're going to construct the thank you, the subsequent thing that we send out. They need to feel this sense of agency, and there's a variety of ways that you can go about doing that. They need to feel a sense of competence, which is kind of the term in the literature, but that means that nobody feels good about thinking that their $20 or their $2,000 got pissed away. You want to feel like you made a good choice. Everyone wants to look smart in every situation, including their giving. And that gets referred to sometimes as impact, but I don't think impact precisely defines the goal as well as it should. Meaning, I just want to convey to them that they've made a good choice. That's competence. And the third is relatedness, the sense of connection. And that could be to the mission or the organization, but they need to feel some sense of kind of personal connection. That's the job. And those are three key psychological needs to foster intrinsic motivation, kind of that internal motivation. So yes, I'm a dog lover, but if and you're an animal welfare organization, so I've got that alignment, but you can totally fuck that up if you make it feel pressurizing. If I feel like I pissed away my $20 and I don't really have any sense of connection to you. So that quality of motivation, that intrinsic, is entirely under our control. And uh, hitting them with a second solicitation right after the first undermines my sense of autonomy, as a for instance. Not taking the time to convey and show that my $20 made some sort of impact, had some sort of positive effect, that it wasn't pissed away, is undermining my competence. And so those are the jobs to be done. Now, importantly, that doesn't mean just a constant barrage of no asked content to do that job. When we think about communications and kind of campaigning, we tend to operate in a pulsing kind of modality versus a continuous always on. Most of the sector operates on calendar mode and continuous always on, meaning if there's 12 months in the year, and last time I checked there were, I'm going to have 12 things at minimum, probably 40 things, or so that constant on is going to breed a certain amount of irritation in anyone, even if you're mission aligned. And there's real value in having some white space, some breath. And as it turns out, the kind of the natural attention pattern tends to follow this up and down sort of a deal, where and so I want to kind of match my communications to their natural inclination to tune in and tune out. And it turns out that it takes very little once you come back on after you've been dark for some period, say a month or 2 months off, for them to kind of reorient, connect to the brand, get that mission alignment, and yeah, in some cases give during that window. So psychological needs, be satisfied with the most likely positive outcome, avoid the negative outcome, and don't it's not a constant just blast of stuff. There's this pulsing idea.
I feel like you need a TED talk to like debunk all the myths that just for the sector, like maybe it's just for board members, so people to just hear all the things that you're telling the executive directors to do is not true. It's BS and you're killing them. and let's remake it in some way that this is actually doable in a way that works. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a board member in an organization I worked for a number of years ago who told me, you get to ask me once a year for money. If I ever get something from you, that's another solicitation, you get half. He was on the board, right? So he was a good donor. He gave a significant amount of money, but he just didn't want to be bothered. He was mission aligned. He was an alum of the institution, the whole thing. But he's like, I don't need this from you. I don't need to hear from you. I don't want to hear from you. And so it was like this negative incentive that if I went and did it, he would give me less money.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets to another um, uh, sort of bastardization of a word, and it's just been engagement is one of my favorite
Oh,
words to hate. Um,
my
I
least
don't.
favorite word in the industry, engagement. Ugh.
Good. Well, here's my hot take, as it were. That there's in keeping with ask more, make more, there's this view that more engagement is better. And engagement used to be, in the old days, and in any sort of sane definition, but we don't have a sane definition in the sector, is it's a mental state. And so the best definition of someone being kind of engrossed and engaged is not something that anyone's measuring. It might be that they're reading your content. That's probably the number one activity that might demonstrate that they're quote unquote kind of engrossed and engaged with the organization. And it doesn't get measured at all. And instead, engagement, because it's easy to measure, has been defined as this set of non-financial things that I do, oftentimes with my mouse. So I click, I scroll, I like, I comment, or I, show up at this or that. And so it's this set of non-financial behaviors. If, and again, the supposition is that more is better. And so if that's true, much like ask more, make more, it's just going to breed a lot of stuff that you want me to move my mouse for. And the reality is your board member is more typical than not. Commitment to the cause is strongly held, but often very passive. Not only am I unlikely to do that stuff, but you pushing it in front of me, I don't think you've got bad intent. I like the organization, but it makes me feel crappy because there's no chance I'm doing any of it. And so you actually undermine commitment with pushing these things out when it tends to be passive. And most of our connection to charities is passive. You can be highly satisfied and highly committed, and all I'm going to do is give to you once a year. And we need to get much more comfortable with letting people be psychologically satisfied.
There are a couple other things that I've seen that that you've put out there that have sort of I don't want to use the word shattered, but I might use the word shattered. Like things that I knew to be true, right? And so I wanted to, now that I have the opportunity, I wanted to ask you about them. So one of them is when I first got my start, I read a lot about how to craft a good appeal, about how to make an ask, and like the rule was the story should be unfinished, and we want the donor to be the hero who comes in and saves the day and finishes the story. Uh, you don't believe that that's true, correct?
I think that's garbage, is what I think. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yes,
That's
that's
one.
the answer I was
Okay,
hoping
next.
for. But no, but I want to stay there because I knew the answer to that question, but now I get the opportunity to ask you about that. So what is the we should finish the story. There should be a happy ending, and the donor doesn't play the role of the hero.
This is one of the most misunderstood things about emotion, and this permeates academia too. There's only a small slice of academia who, in our view, kind of talk about this in the right way. Emotion is not the cause of my behavior. Emotion is the goal. Um, I don't
Hmm.
I don't eat because I'm hungry. I eat to become satiated. I'm focused on the behavior is trying to achieve an end state. I don't give because you made me feel sad. Now, making me feel sad might be useful. I would say it's not a necessary precondition, but it might be useful. If and only if, so if you've made me feel sad, I'm going to do something to alleviate that negative mood state. Okay. And I've got choices. I can give to you. I can take your appeal and throw it in the trash and process in my brain that I'm, and well, let's say we have two people and those are the two choices. I can just ignore, throw it in the trash. And the other person says, well, I'm going to give. Now, in both cases, and this all is happening subconsciously, no one would sort of self-report this. What you're looking for is what was the outcome, and you'll just naturally sort of infer that, and it becomes this feedback loop that you create, and the charity can also create it, by the way. But you're trying to determine, did this path that I chose, give or throw it in the trash, resolve the negative emotion satisfactorily? And if the answer is yes, that becomes a rut, a behavioral rut. And I'm more likely, because I've got this feedback loop, to do it again. And given response rates and all of that, it's pretty clear that a whole bunch of people have decided that the best way to resolve a negative emotion is just ignore it, tune you out. I'm just not even going to bother looking. So when you have the story, and I should stipulate that most storytelling is just awful, and we've done objective measuring of the quality of the storytelling, and it's really bad. So that's another kind of antecedent to all of this. You got to actually be good at storytelling. But if you only tell part of the story, there's this really crappy situation, and that's going to probably invoke some negative emotion in me. I'm going to feel sad. I'm going to feel pissed off. And you don't resolve the situation in the story. There's a variety of things happening. One, you've put the cognitive burden on me to figure out if this is going to, if supporting you is going to help resolve this crappy situation. We're cognitive misers, and we just talked about how passive giving tends to be. Even if I'm committed to the cause, I'm out. I'm not even going to bother doing the work. So that creates this cognitive load on the reader, the viewer, whatever it is, to try to figure out the anticipated emotion from giving. Because again, I don't give because you made me feel sad or pissed off. I'm giving because I think that's the best resolution to feel less sad and less pissed off. God forbid, happy. And so when we complete the story, and there is value for a variety of reasons in starting in the past, showing crappy situation and circumstance and providing some context, having the intervention, which yes, is the charity is involved at that point, and then some resolution. But importantly, the resolution also needs to be kind of agentic for that protagonist, for the character in our story, the beneficiary. And that does a few things. One, it shows me positive outcome from that intervention, which yes, my donation is helping to fuel. And so you've answered that part for me and reduced the cognitive load. You've also, when I can see that the beneficiary has this they're a part of it. They're sort of autonomous and agentic and involved in, it's not just that we gave them food and their bellies were full, is that they got food and their kid was able to focus in school that day. And because this mom is just like the mom reader, it has the same kind of higher value goals. I want my kid to do well and to be happy and all that. And so you've two things. You've created this sort of mirroring bit where I want to feel agentic and positive about stuff. And so I want to mirror this story. And there's a certain type of adult, kind of generative adult, who tend to be really good donors. They're likely to give. They if there's mission alignment, they'll keep giving. They tend to have stories that match what I just described, which, by the way, is the story that's as old as time. I mean, the Bible has something to say about this redemptive arc, and every Hollywood script of note that's got any sort of storytelling kind of staying power is going to have that same sort of arc. So it's not a novel idea. Generative adults have that same arc, and so we're matching up their life with this. And so those are all the reasons why, give me $10 or the baby seal is going to get it is just a crappy way to fundraise. And that we also have the other when it's just the negative or just the crappy situation, you're switching to kind of this external motivation. It can feel guilt induced, and that has no staying power at all. So complete the story.
Just to note the clock, Raimy, we're running a little bit long, so I don't want to keep Kevin all day, although I would love to. I always love a guy who's going to come on and debunk everything. Like, it's one of my favorite things in the world. Because so much of this stuff is like, it's the Bible of fundraising and giving, and you're basically throwing, smoke at all of it, which I love and appreciate. But we are running a little tight on the time side here. So I wanted to, if I could step all the way back for just a minute, because you're super passionate about this. Where does this come from? Like, if you're studying behavioral science and this is where you're going professionally, how did it end up here with nonprofits? Because I feel like I'm guessing that a lot of what you talk about resonates with people, but a lot of people, because you're bucking up against so many trends and things that people think are the gospel, that there's a lot of frustration in the work because people just don't listen to what you're talking about. So even though it's based in the science, it's based in the data, it's like, how did you get there?
Yeah, that's a series of random twists and turns. And I got exposed to the sector, it's probably 14 years ago, I guess, give or take. Prior to that, I've been in the commercial space, and my foray into fundraising was idiosyncratic, or that first exposure. But as a result of that, I saw that a lot of what I was doing in commercial space was not being done here. There was no real consumer donor understanding. There were all these things that were sort of best practice that seemed odd to me, and a lot of just sort of folklore and intuition that have been around for decades. Like we haven't revised our priors in 30 years, 40 years. That seems a little nuts. There's no way we got it all right 40 years ago in this fundraising domain. And so the DonorVoice was born of a desire to kind of bring into this space what I was doing in the commercial space, and it has greatly evolved in the 12-year history of the company. That evolution was mostly purposeful, some opportunistic, but it was always guided by this desire that goes beyond fundraising to just not give me some reason to believe. I hate opinions, including my own, and so let's have some evidence behind this. Let's have a reason to believe. It doesn't have to be some deep lit review and whatever else, but just sort of give me a reason to believe. And there was not a lot of reason to believe with some of this stuff. And when you marry that up against what I think is a quiet but becoming less quiet desperation for change. I mean, look, the trend lines are really bad in the sector, and they're not going to get better by just trying to tweak the old model. We need a new model. And so, in that way, it felt a bit of a calling. It wasn't cause specific, but it was, look, there's you're just operating on the wrong system here, and I think we can build a better one, and that has been our fuel.
Awesome. Awesome. Kevin, where can people read more of your work?
Yeah, LinkedIn is where probably the best place to find, me, us. And so DonorVoice has a page, and I, of course, have a page. And so following on that, we're going to post 2-3 times a week, probably minimum. So that's a good place to get caught up. Although LinkedIn and its sort of you know maniacal reach, algorithmic black box stuff, who knows? So I think there's a Donor Voice newsletter you can sign up for on LinkedIn. The Agitator, which you mentioned, is the blog that we publish 3 times a year. And so if you go to just Google Agitator Donor Voice, you can find a sign up for that, and that gets delivered straight to the inbox.
We will link to all of
Amazing.
that in the show description
Okay.
when we post it. Thank you, Kevin. That was amazing, illuminating. Loving the debunking of everything. I'm definitely advocating for your TED Talk because I really feel like and fill the room with just burnt out executive directors and fundraisers, and give them a little bit of like, oh, does someone actually appreciates and understands what we're talking about all the time?
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. Thank you very much. Because it does feel Don Quixote-esque sometimes. Though I will say that, I mean, this is cliche, but I think it's true. Change comes because you feel the light or you see the heat, or you see the light and feel the heat. There we go.
Yeah,
And I think the heat's been turned up to an uncomfortable level because the whole system is starting to cave in on itself. And like I said, you can't fix it at the margins. And so there's a growing receptivity to and quiet, but less quiet, I think, sort of almost desperation for just give me different answers to the same questions. I'm not even sure if you're right. And yes, some of what we say is kind of head nodding, which is kind of the point. We're talking about human psychology, and we've all been human since day one, or most of us
right.
anyway. And so it should feel familiar and on point. And does it work? That thinking in their shoes, I'm not sure, but it kind of makes sense. And God knows what we're doing isn't working. And so let's give it a go. And I do think that the sector has started to turn a corner on.
Amazing. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate your time today. Talk to you soon.